I'm Lynn Packer. This is the story of how Larry H. Miller Real Estate, one of Utah's largest real estate developers, helped trash a Kaysville, Utah Homeowners Association and finally dumped it on homeowners, leaving them with a mess that's nearly impossible to clean up. This is the sixth in a series spanning 5 years. If you're not familiar with the Hill Farms HOA specifically, or at least have an interest in HOAs generally, you should first view previous reports or just skip this one. Here in bullet points is the Larry H. Miller playbook on how to trash an HOA. Put highly partisan developer employees on the board who will ignore their fiduciary duty to the HOA and give 100% loyalty to the developer. And of course, keep homeowners off the board. Employ attorneys and managers fully loyal to the developer. Keep most board meetings secret. The less homeowners know, the better. Conceal records from homeowners. Do not enforce HOA rules, even though it's the law. This more than anything kills HOAs. Do not prepare members for turnover. Make sure the new homeowners board members are inexperienced, unprepared, and disorganized. And stage sham transition elections for new homeowner directors. Since my last report, the developer, Larry H. Miller Real Estate, finally turned over control of a dysfunctional HOA to homeowners, beginning with a November 2023 email to the owners of some 296 homes. Exciting news! Hill Farms developer to homeowner transition begins soon. We're excited to begin the process of transitioning the leadership of the Hill Farms Subdivision Homeowner Association to the residents of Hill Farms. Larry H. Miller Real Estate began looking for 2 members to serve as advisory members. The email ended, "Thank you for all you do to make Hill Farms a beautiful neighborhood." Leading up to the transition, 3 Larry H. Miller executives formed the Hill Farms Board of Directors. Natalie Gordon, the chairperson, Annie McDonald, and Christy Crabtree. That board did appoint 2 homeowners as advisors to help prepare for turnover. John Sundloff was one of the first 2 appointed, but he told me he was not permitted to attend actual board meetings and resigned. Manny Van Pelt replaced Sundloff, but did little or nothing. David Broberg, on the other hand, was very engaged, did attend some board meetings that were otherwise secret, but he only represented a fraction of homeowners and had little success. Even before the transition process began and before a date was set for it to occur, I had emailed the board chairperson, manager, and attorney saying that to prepare for turnover, homeowners need at least a year to retain an attorney, hire an accountant, and recruit qualified board members. I wrote that I was very concerned that manager inspections for rules violations ended at least a year earlier. I said my preference is to have Larry H. Miller Real Estate completely revive and restore the HOA before turning it over at its expense. In the alternative, dissolve it. No turnover needed. And I said at the very least, divide it into 4 or 5 smaller, more manageable HOAs to make it easier for members to clean up Larry H. Miller Real Estate's mess. 8 months later, after the transition period had begun and a turnover date had been set for July 17th, I emailed board chairperson Natalie Gordon along with the attorney and manager. I wrote, "Hill Farms homeowners are utterly unprepared for turnover. Homeowners should seek legal counsel on how best to pursue the transition. Walking around Hill Farms, anyone can observe that enforcement of the CC&Rs has been seriously compromised. Homeowners should insist that all operational and financial deficiencies be corrected before accepting turnover. Or, in the alternative, the HOA should be dissolved. No turnover occurs. There was no response. During the prep period, advisory board member David Broberg initiated contact, part of his effort to help facilitate turnover, and we met. He was okay with the LHM board meeting in secret. He said the directors told him there were no existing rules violations, which of course was not true. So I invited him to take a brief walk around part of Phase 5 where I lived. I showed him there had been no inspections for at least 3 years. He took note of some violations he saw, put them on a punch list, and shared it with the board. After his next meeting with the board, Broberg emailed. It was 2 months before turnover. He wrote, "Good news. The inspections are coming back. Welch Randall, that's the HOA's manager, is going to send an announcement soon with a copy of the homeowner rules and regulations and will begin doing a thorough inspection through all phases before any transition happens." He wrote, as I understand, they're going to do a pass, first for rules violations, trash cans, basketball hoops, signs, RVs, and so on. Then in a few weeks, do another pass with representatives of the ARB, that's the Architectural Review Board, to review architectural violations. They're prepared to issue warnings first, then escalate to fines as needed. There was a slight indication that what Broberg said might happen, that the developer board might restart inspections and issuing fines. The next month, in June, a month before transition, the board wrote, "Welch Randall will conduct an on-site walkthrough in the coming weeks. This walkthrough will encompass both common spaces and individual properties to ensure compliance with the established guidelines. Thank you for your cooperation in preserving the integrity and beauty of our neighborhood." But the thorough inspections Broberg was told would occur, should have happened, never happened. The potential cost prior to turnover, had all rules, including landscaping and architectural, been enforced, it would have cost Larry H. Miller Real Estate tens of thousands, more likely into the hundreds of thousands, to bring common areas into compliance. It would have cost non-conforming homeowners combined into the hundreds of thousands of dollars to achieve adherence. Take landscaping, for example. HOA quality landscaping is not cheap. A professional landscape architect's design could cost $2,000 to $5,000 and up. Landscaping, $10,000 to $25,000 and way up. It appears to me that while many homeowners flatly refuse to comply with the rules, a few may have gone way beyond and spent $50,000 or more on landscaping. Early on, proposed landscaping plans were reviewed by a landscape architect. That ended right away. And there never was a formal ARB committee. For a while, someone from the management company checked plans. After that, just a developer's office worker did the job. Part of the prep for turnover involves setting up a candidate selection and election process for homeowners to replace developer employees on the Hill Farms board. Here are some turnover suggestions from a Utah HOA attorney whose opinion contrasts sharply with Hill Farms' HOA attorney. Form a transition committee. Meet with developer to discuss transition. If association is inheriting developer's management company, attorney, and accountant, it's vital to discover their independence. That is, are they too loyal to the developer? It's highly likely that they are conflicted out and should not represent the HOA. If you want to use them, make sure you're comfortable that they can fully represent the HOA against the developer. If not comfortable, hire new professionals. Inspect common elements, preferably with developer present. If there are problem areas, hire an engineer to perform the inspections. Warning: this can range from several $100s to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's some more transition advice from the Foundation for Community Association Research. Counsel for the developer has ethical constraints against acting on behalf of the association in any matter where its interests are adverse to the developer. It is recommended that the developer's attorney never represent the association. All legal fees for work on association-related matters should be billed directly to the developer. Further, the developer's attorney should state in writing to the association that he represents the developer only, not the association. This inherent conflict dictates that the association obtain independent counsel as soon as possible. Here's the Larry H. Miller Board's election preparation. No homeowner transition committee was ever formed. No independent legal and financial review of the HOA prior to homeowners taking over. No demand for Larry H. Miller Real Estate's failures to be corrected. No screening of potential member board candidates. No announcement of candidates prior to the turnover meeting. And no ballots were sent to all members. Here's how much time Larry H. Miller established for an election. A process that should have taken at least a year of hard work lasted less than 3 weeks, beginning to end. And that was not the worst of it. Less than 2 weeks before giving up control of the board, Larry H. Miller Real Estate, in an email, called for candidates to come forward. We're seeking homeowners interested in becoming board nominees. Apply via email. Nominations will also be accepted from the floor during the meeting. Each nominee will have 2 minutes, that's not a typo, to introduce themselves and explain why they would like to serve as a board member. Zoom will not be available for this meeting. You had to be there to vote. No ballots were sent to all members. Finally, after years of developer control, turnover, and the election of new board members occurred at the same meeting. No nominees were known to attendees in advance. Turnout was dismal. 8 candidates were given 2 minutes each for introductions. None of the candidates had been screened or known in advance. No printed platforms were handed out. No questions were permitted. Perhaps no more than 30 ballots were cast for 5 new directors. The manager and 2 members counted ballots in secret the next day. Secret ballot counting and manager participation are both considered highly unethical. The new board announced the 5 winners via email. Whitney Krogh from Phase 7, Kyle Schaefer, Phase 1, David Law from 1, Corey Greenwell from 4, and Charlene Kerwin from Phase 2. Phases 3, 5, and 6 have no representation. The new board and its manager will not release the vote count. Now, at the time of this posting, after more than 9 months in control, the inexperienced board picked up where the Larry H. Miller board left off, began holding secret meetings, continued withholding key records from members, did not seek independent legal and financial counsel to evaluate the state of the HOA, provided no email and phone contact information. All contact has to go through the manager. Board members isolated themselves. They continued blocking homeowner discussion via any kind of forum or similar means, and decided to continue the Larry H. Miller policy of not inspecting for rules infractions, despite its legal fiduciary duty to enforce the covenants. The neighborhoods themselves are the best evidence that the board's manager still does not inspect for and enforce the rules, leaving perhaps hundreds of violations to keep piling up. Not just homes that are poorly landscaped, some are not landscaped at all, garbage cans left in plain view, trailers stored in driveways, Christmas lights still up, trees not properly mulched, many dead trees never replaced, weed-infested, never-edged lawns, and non-compliant signage. Many are ads. Okay, we know that the Larry H. Miller Real Estate Board never directed its managers to inspect for and enforce rules violations. And we also know the new Homeowner Board continued the no inspection, no enforcement policy. Neither articulated the illegal non-enforcement programs. But that changed in February this year. At a meeting of homeowners, the new board put its no inspection policy on the record, putting it into words at the meeting, and then again later, putting it in writing in the meeting's minutes. Here's the startling revelation that came during a February meeting of the new board, an admission or declaration of sorts made by Amber Flink, the Welch Randall manager assigned to Hill Farms. She followed up by putting it in the minutes. She wrote, Welch Randall's contract specifies 12 walkthroughs for 2025. These are not inspections, as we are not inspectors. Truly jaw-dropping. While it is true the manager had quit inspecting, it's astonishing she would say it in a board meeting, then stick it in the minutes, because the management company has a legal fiduciary duty to inspect and enforce. Of course, managers are supposed to be inspectors, and even the same board's minutes the previous year recognized that fact. The minutes say that the manager's role is to monitor and manage community compliance issues, and that the manager is to conduct community inspections twice monthly. The day after the February 2025 board meeting, which I attended via Zoom, I emailed the director's manager and attorney challenging the veracity of the manager's claim to not be an inspector. I first pointed to the contract with the previous management company, Community Solutions and Sales. Agent shall periodically inspect the community for violations of the restrictive covenants and rules and regulations no less than once a month. Then there was Welch Randall's 2020 contract agreement that required them to do 23 inspections per year. And the Hill Farms HOA attorney refers to walk-through inspection records. The Hill Farms declaration uses the term inspection in connection with enforcement. Hill Farms rules were created for the efficient preservation of the values and amenities of the property, to administer the common areas, and otherwise administer and enforce the provisions of this declaration. There was no response. Non-enforcement is perhaps the biggest among factors that killed the Hill Farms HOA. Gone are the characteristics of an HOA: enhanced curb appeal, harmonious, cohesive look across neighborhoods, attractive, well-maintained landscapes, clutter-free, and boosted property values. In the next section of this report, I'll go into a huge financial burden Larry H. Miller Real Estate left members to deal with. The cost of maintaining common area green space indefinitely is the biggest financial burden the developers dumped on homeowners through turnover. How did the concept of HOA common area and green space even come about? In the United States, the vast majority of new subdivisions have homeowners associations. In 2023, about 65% of new single-family homes were built within HOAs, and the trend is still on the rise. It's not because millions of home buyers suddenly demanded to live in HOAs. So how does green space figure into the Hill Farms and other HOAs? It's because developers found a much cheaper and easier way to get their plats approved, aided and abetted by city officials. Green space, it played a big role. Oversimplifying, here's the history behind how HOA homeowners came to get stuck with maintaining their parks and common area. In the beginning, Cities, using existing residence tax revenue, bought property for parks, recreational facilities, and green space, paid for improving them, then paid to maintain them, usually through their parks departments. Then cities began assessing park impact fees on new home building permits and/or requiring subdivision developers to donate part of their land for parks or pay the equivalent in cash. But cities would still own the parks and pay for upkeep. Finally, developer created HOAs to get plat approval, buy the land for parks and buffers, improve it, but thereafter, homeowners pay for all maintenance. Homeowners share ownership of the land, not the city. Hill Farms developers burdened homeowners with paying for the perpetual maintenance of about 14 acres of common area, consisting of green space buffers and parks. The developers had to commit to an expansive common area in order to get Kaysville to rezone the property and approve dense housing. In 2012, at the time the Hill Farms subdivision was proposed, Kaysville City's master plan had prohibited more than 2 homes per acre in that area. The developer's request for a zoning change to permit denser housing was met with citizen protest. To win approval, the developer packed proposed homes closer together on smaller lots and surrounded them with green space as a buffer. The developer's main green space motive? Money. Not to enhance the beauty of the project, although green space can do that, but to get City Planning Commission and City Council approval. Instead of constructing buffers and parks, then donating them to the city for the City Parks Department to maintain, the developers sweetened the pot by assuring city officials that homeowners, not the city, would pay for maintaining the common area. It's an unholy alliance between city officials and developers, not just in Kaysville and Layton, but across the country, part of the HOA trend. Developers get far easier and cheaper approval for their subdivisions. Cities get new parks and green space at no cost to purchase, improve, and maintain. HOA members are double taxed for all other parks in the city, but pay for their own parks that others outside the HOA can use. In 2012, the year the Hill Farms HOA was proposed to the city, Kaysville had just completed a new impact fee plan. Recreational sites and facilities had been acquired through taxes, developer impact fees, grants, and utility fees. There was no mention of future parks, recreation facilities, and stormwater ponds being acquired and maintained by HOAs, not the city. But that would soon change that same year. Here's what happened in August 2012. There was a contentious public hearing about the Hill Farms subdivision proposal. Protesters opposed rezoning the Hill property to allow denser housing. Developer Destination Homes proposed a green space buffer, as well as parks and bike trails to mitigate concerns. This is the drawing shown at the hearing. The proposed parks and buffers are in green. The green dots are heavily tree-lined streets. One of the questions, who will maintain each of the parks? The developer said, the Homeowners Association will maintain and manage the open space, not those already residing in Kaysville. One attendee predicted, after this property is developed, Destination Homes will leave, and the residents will be left to deal with whatever they leave behind. The green space financial burden was greatly intensified with the completion of the final phase before turnover, Phase 7. Its common area ratio is much higher than the other phases, adding a rather massive 4¼ acres because of 2 detention basins in the floodplain next to Kays Creek, plus more common area for parks and an easement for a pipeline. And speaking of Kays Creek, it presents another potential liability for all homeowners, not just those in Phase 7. The original Hill Farms plan highlighted a walking path along Kays Creek and called for a bridge across it to link two of the project's phases. The bridge was never built. A walking bike path in Phase 7 was constructed and is next to Kays Creek, a potential hazard all members are responsible for. The new board earlier this year discussed whether the creek posed a hazard, whether someone could fall in and suffer injury or death. The danger is that anyone, especially children, could leave the trail, slip down the steep bank, and fall into the creek where they could be injured or drowned, or tumble onto large rocks that line part of the bank. During the first annual homeowners meeting with the new board, the question came up as reflected in the minutes. Who maintains bike path along Kays Creek in Phase 7? And should there be a fence along the creek? Is this an HOA responsibility or Layton City? The HOA needs a definitive answer on who is responsible, not just for a fence, but for maintenance of trail and trees along it. There was some discussion that Layton City maintains the trail and fence on the west side of Angel Street, but we need a definitive answer. That's referring to a neighboring HOA that the creek runs through that did install a fence. It's yet another problem the Larry H. Miller board should have resolved but left for the new directors to deal with. The new board, during its next meeting a month later, made a decision. Should there be a fence along the creek? The board discussed the pros and cons of having a fence installed, but have recommended against this action. Continuing with the minutes, Whitney Krogh, a director who's an attorney, pointed out that the fence might do more harm than good. Without a fence, the onus is on the parents to watch young children and to warn older ones not to go into the creek when the water is high. If there's a fence, parents assume the fence is protecting their children. If the fence falls into disrepair, has a hole or a gap, and a kid gets through, that means the HOA is liable. Whitney cited case law to support her comments regarding the fence. I asked the board to provide Krogh's case law, and the board would not. The path along Kays Creek continues through the neighboring HOA, as the Hill Farms board noted, is fully fenced. Questions remain. Did the neighboring HOA overreact and waste money on a fence that also increases its liability, or is the Hill Farms new board subjecting members to excessive risk? The final topic I'll cover in this video, Larry H. Miller not only left behind excessive green space for homeowners to keep up, but much of the common area they left behind was also poorly graded, poorly constructed, poorly maintained, and had lots of dead, sick, and missing trees. In connection with trees, the Larry H. Miller board violated one of the HOA's rules it was supposed to be following and enforcing. To enhance tree health and appearance, the HOA rules require mulch tree rings or rectangles around the base of every tree. A 2-foot minimum mulch radius tree ring or rectangle from curb to sidewalk is required at the base of any tree. Edging must be consistent with the rest of the yard. This photo shows a minimum radius mulch ring, but perhaps 90% of all trees in the HOA do not comply and have turf choking the base. I suspect none of the perhaps hundreds of trees in the Hill Farms common area is in compliance. The Welch-Randall manager knew about the rule, knows about its importance, yet refuses to inspect and enforce the rule. Here's how the new board of directors is talking about dead and dying trees. In August, dead and dying trees, Amber and Whitney, the manager Amber Flink and board member Whitney Krogh, to document on next walkthrough. In September, dead and dying trees, how soon can we get trees replaced in common areas? October, tree replacement is about $15,000. November, Buse will replace dead trees in common areas in the spring. Apparently, the board had asked the maintenance company, Buse Landscaping, to proceed. The tree discussion continued earlier this year at the annual board homeowner meeting. Tree replacement, many dead dying trees to be replaced around community. Corey Greenwell asked if anyone has any ideas as to why trees are dying so often and what we can do to prevent that from continuing. Residents suggested contacting the Utah State University Extension Program to do soil tests and make recommendations. They're still sort of spinning their wheels. At the same meeting, there was a question and answer period. These are direct quotes from the minutes. Question: what is the homeowner responsibility for replacing trees in park strips? Is there a limit to the number of times a homeowner is expected to replace a tree in park strip? Answer: board needs to look into this for a definitive answer. HOA rules say the front park strip of each preserve and garden lot must include a minimum of 3 trees. The front park strip of each cottage lot shall include a minimum of 2 trees. However, it does not specify who is responsible for replacing trees that die. The idea was to have tree-lined streets in the community, part of the character of the neighborhood. But they keep dying. One resident suggested we work with landscaping company to replace trees in park strips and ensure there's an adequate buffer around each tree so the bark does not get damaged by equipment. HOA should require landscaper to maintain at least an 18-inch buffer around trees and to use fertilizer, weed, seed to keep them healthy. The next meeting in February, apparently the board changed its mind about giving Buse the bid without an RFP process. Tree replacement bid. Attached Wasatch Lawn Pros and Simplified Landscaping, formerly Buse bids, waiting on bid from Rivendell Tree Experts and Brightview. $17,000 has been budgeted for this. We're waiting for a few more bids before making a decision. Will landscapers include buffer protective ring around tree bases? Can they do the same for existing trees? The next meeting. 2 bids received to replace some trees, waiting for a third. A board member said he noticed that most trees in park strips in front of member homes are not mulched at their bases. Here's what's sort of odd about all the tree talk. Over all the weeks, the board has been agonizing over trees, about why they're dying, about whether homeowners are responsible for trees in park strips. The manager, Amber Flink, who's at the meetings, the one who manages landscape maintenance and rules enforcement, is saying nothing. Maybe because she and her company, Welch Randall Real Estate, are mostly responsible for the dying tree epidemic. Here's what the management company knows but was not saying in the meetings. Mulch tree rings or rectangles are required for all trees in the HOA. The management company several years ago stopped telling the lawn care vendor to install and maintain the mulch tree rings in common areas. The management company also stopped inspecting and requiring residents to install and maintain them in park strips. Yes, homeowners are responsible for replacing dead trees in the park strips in front of their houses. It's in the governing documents. Welch Randall owner Brad Randall, with Hill Farms manager Amber Flink assisting, holds online training sessions it calls Board Members U. One of the workshops was about trees and featured an arborist as a guest expert. He said, "Turf grass up to the tree is an enemy of the tree. Replace with mulch, which helps retain water. HOA trees' biggest enemy, lawnmowers and weed whackers that can ultimately be fatal. Tree rings help keep lawnmowers and weed whackers away." Based on that, what grades do I give the manager and its landscape vendor? They get solid Fs. because the manager, Welch Randall, does not practice what it preaches. For years, lawnmowers and weed whackers have been assaulting trees in Hill Farm's common areas, and turf grass chokes out virtually every tree in the green spaces. Back to one-time advisory board member David Broberg and an email he sent me in May last year, 2 months before turnover. Should we hire a different management company or continue to work with Welch Randall? Should we keep the same law firm attorney or retain a new one? Of course, I suggested both the management company and attorney should be fired once turnover occurs. But before then, hire a new attorney and management expert to provide unbiased expert advice. Here's some questions that might be asked independent legal counsel. Can developer Larry H. Miller Real Estate still be billed for fixing all the problems it left behind? The new board is charging homeowners. Did the HOA's attorney, Blake Johnson, breach his fiduciary duty and or breach his contract? Did the management company, Welch Randall, breach its contract? Could either be held financially accountable? So what does the Welch Randall Management Company do instead of enforcing the rules, which it's not done for years, and after it helped stage a sham election? Welch Randall Management is staging a party. It announced a big party that it claims is free, but is really paid for out of Hill Farm's HOA funds. It will be held at the HOA's largest park. Partygoers will walk on turf that was not properly prepared or graded, turf that has always been dandelion and weed infested, and walk around dead and missing trees and all trees that violate the HOA's requirement that they have mulch rings at their bases. That's the end, and by the way, if you happen by a tree in Hill Farms, please give it a hug. They could really use it. For questions, comments, or corrections, here's my email address.